To save the planet, we are tearing it apart. We've been told that green energy is the path to peace, cleaner air, quieter cities, solar panels on rooftops, electric cars gliding through traffic, wind turbines turning on distant hills. But beneath that clean image is a much darker machine. Because every electric vehicle, every solar farm, every battery storage site, every AI data center, and every upgraded power grid needs one metal more than almost anything else: copper. Not rare earths, not lithium, not cobalt. Copper, the metal of electrification. And the world is starting to realize something very uncomfortable. The Green Revolution does not free us from resource wars. It changes what we fight over. For the last century, global power was built around oil. The countries that controlled crude could shape inflation, wars, alliances, and the fate of governments. But the next century may belong to a different class of power broker. Not petro-states, electro-states. Countries sitting on the veins of the energy transition. Chile, Peru, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, Indonesia. China, not because it has the most copper in the ground, but because it controls so much of the refining, smelting, and manufacturing chain. This is not a formal cartel like OPEC. There is no polished meeting room where ministers sit around a table and set one global copper price. The copper cartel is messier than that. It is a cartel of geography, a cartel of choke points, a cartel of mines, ports, railways, smelters, water rights, environmental permits, political pressure, and social unrest. And it is rising because the world has made one giant promise without fully accepting the physical cost: net zero. The fatal flaw of the Green Revolution is simple. The energy transition is sold as digital, clean, and weightless. But it is not weightless. It is the most metal-intensive industrial project in human history. An electric car needs far more copper than a gasoline car. An electric car needs far more copper than a gasoline car. Wind and solar farms need copper for generators, transformers, cables, inverters, substations, and transmission lines. The power grid itself needs to be rebuilt, expanded, and hardened. And the grid is the part people forget. You can announce 1 million electric cars, but if the grid cannot move the electricity, those cars are just expensive promises on wheels. You can build solar farms in the desert, but if there are no transmission lines to move that power to cities, those panels become a monument to bad planning. You can build AI data centers that consume electricity like small towns, but they still need copper cables, copper bus bars, copper transformers, copper cooling systems, and copper-heavy grid upgrades. The future is not running on clouds. It is running on conductors. And those conductors come from holes in the ground. Huge holes. Open pits so large they can be seen from space. Underground tunnels running for miles. Tailings dams. Chemical processing plants. Water pipelines. Diesel trucks the size of houses moving mountains of rock just to extract a small percentage of metal. That is the physical reality behind the clean energy dream. And it gets worse. The easy copper is already gone. Many of the world's great copper mines are old. Ore grades are falling. That means miners must crush more rock, use more energy, consume more water, and generate more waste to get the same amount of copper. So just as the world needs copper more than ever, copper is becoming harder, slower, and more expensive to produce. This is the supply trap. Demand is rising because electrification requires copper. Supply is struggling because new mines take years, sometimes decades, to approve, finance, build, and connect to infrastructure. And the result is a structural squeeze. The world wants to decarbonize fast, but mining moves slowly. Politics moves slower. And local communities are no longer willing to quietly absorb the costs. That is why copper is becoming the new oil. Not because it burns, but because it decides who has power. In the 1970s, oil producers discovered that control over one critical resource could shake the entire global economy. A supply shock in one region could send prices soaring everywhere. Governments suddenly realized that energy security was not an abstract concept. It was survival. Today, a similar logic is forming around copper. A copper shortage would not just mean higher prices for metal traders. It would mean more expensive cars, slower grid upgrades, delayed renewable projects, and more expensive data centers, more fragile supply chains, and a much harder path to decarbonization. That gives copper-rich countries leverage, and they know it. For decades, many developing countries exported raw materials while richer nations captured most of the value through refining, manufacturing, finance, and technology. Copper ore left the mine. The profit left the country. The pollution stayed behind. Now producer countries are asking a simple question. Why should we remain the hole in the ground while someone else builds the green economy? This is the new resource nationalism. Governments want higher royalties, more local processing, more state ownership, more jobs, more control over exports, more domestic industry. From the outside, investors call it instability. From inside those countries, it looks more like a correction. Because if copper is essential to the future, then the countries that own the copper want a larger share of that future. And this is where the global power balance starts to shift. The old map of energy security was built around the Persian Gulf, pipelines, shipping lanes, and oil refineries. The new map runs through the Andes, the Congo Basin, the Copperbelt, Indonesian islands, and Chinese smelters. The new question is not only who has the metal, it is who can move it, process it, finance it, and protect it. Nowhere is this more obvious than South America. Chile and Peru are the beating heart of global copper mining. Chile is the world's largest copper producer. Peru is one of the most important sources of new supply. Together, they are central to the energy transition, but they are also warning signs. In northern Chile, copper mining collides with one of the most basic resources on Earth: water. The Atacama region is one of the driest places on the planet. Mining there requires enormous amounts of water for processing, dust control, and operations. As ore grades decline, water demand becomes even harder to manage. So the conflict is not simply miners versus environmentalists. It is mines versus farms, mines versus indigenous communities, mines versus fragile ecosystems, mines versus the future water supply of entire regions. Companies are trying to solve this with desalination plants, pipelines, and new technologies. But those projects are expensive, they take time, and they do not erase the deeper question. Who gets to decide what a landscape is for? Is it for global decarbonization? For local agriculture? For indigenous rights? For national revenue? For foreign shareholders? The answer depends on who has power. In Peru, the problem is not only water, it is trust. Mining projects have triggered protests, roadblocks, shutdowns, and clashes with communities that feel ignored, polluted, underpaid, or excluded from the benefits of extraction. For global markets, these are supply disruptions. For local people, they are fights over land, dignity, water, and survival. That is the moral tension at the center of copper. A mine can be essential for the global climate transition and still be destructive for the people living next to it. Both things can be true, and when both things are true, politics becomes explosive. Because the world is asking mining regions to move faster, approve faster, dig faster, export faster. But local communities are saying, we have heard this story before. The story of progress, the story of jobs, the story of national development, the story of sacrifice today for prosperity tomorrow. And too often, the result was the same. The minerals left, the money left, the damage stayed. This is why the race for copper cannot be separated from security. When a mine becomes critical to national strategy, it stops being just a business. It becomes infrastructure. It becomes a geopolitical asset. And once that happens, security around it changes. Police, private security, military units, and state-backed protection start to appear around projects, roads, ports, and rail lines. Not always as a war zone, but as a sign that copper is no longer treated as just another commodity. It is treated as strategic territory. And the same logic is now playing out in Africa. If South America is the old heart of copper, the African Copperbelt is the new great game. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia sit on some of the most important copper and cobalt deposits in the world. This region is not just a mining zone. It is a battlefield of infrastructure. Because having minerals in the ground is only the beginning. The real power comes from controlling the route out. Railways, ports, border crossings, smelters, warehouses, financing, shipping contracts. This is why the Lobito Corridor matters. It connects the mineral-rich regions of the DRC and Zambia to the Atlantic coast through Angola. For the United States and Europe, it offers a way to reduce dependence on Chinese-controlled supply chains. For African governments, it offers a chance to turn mineral wealth into infrastructure and bargaining power. But for China, this is not new. China spent decades building influence across the critical minerals chain. It financed roads, mines, smelters, and processing capacity. It secured long-term offtake agreements. It built industrial depth, while Western governments were still debating whether globalization had made resource strategy unnecessary. Now the West is trying to catch up. But catching up is expensive, and it is not just a race for mines, it is a race for corridors. The country that controls the corridor controls the clock. If copper can move quickly, securely, and cheaply from mine to port, that route becomes strategic. If it cannot, then the copper might as well still be trapped underground. This is the new great game. Not armies marching across borders in the old imperial style, but banks, diplomats, mining companies, rail concessions, port operators, development agencies, and security agreements competing over the skeleton of the next industrial economy. And the uncomfortable phrase behind this competition is green colonialism. Developing nations are being asked to provide the raw materials for the global North's clean transition, but they are also being asked to absorb the ecological damage, the displacement risks, the political instability, and the social conflict. The electric car in a wealthy city looks clean. The mine behind it does not. The solar panel looks clean. The supply chain behind it does not. The data center looks futuristic. The copper, water, land, and energy behind it are painfully physical. This does not mean the energy transition is fake. It means it is incomplete. Because a clean energy system built on dirty extraction is not truly clean. It is just cleaner at the point of use. And this is the ethical paradox. To build a sustainable future, we may be repeating the same extractive logic that defined the fossil fuel era. Find the resource, control the territory, secure the supply, externalize the damage, tell the public it is necessary. That was the logic of oil. Now it is being repackaged in green. The words have changed, the machines have changed, the moral branding has changed, but the underlying mechanics are familiar. And this is why copper is becoming a defining conflict of the mid-21st century. Because everyone needs it, but no one wants to live next to the mine. The obvious answer is recycling. And recycling is real. Copper is highly recyclable. Much of the copper ever mined is still in use somewhere, in buildings, wires, machines, cars, appliances, and infrastructure. This is the promise of urban mining. Instead of tearing open new landscapes, recover copper from old cities. Old cables, old transformers, old electronics, old buildings, old vehicles. But recycling has limits. You cannot recycle copper that is still locked inside buildings and grids that are still being used. You cannot instantly recover metal from infrastructure that may last 40, 50, or 70 years. You also need collection systems, sorting systems, refining capacity, and economics that make recycling work at massive scale. Recycling can help. It cannot magically replace new mining in the near term. Then there is deep-sea mining. The fantasy is seductive. Instead of digging up forests, deserts, and mountains, companies could harvest mineral-rich nodules from the ocean floor. Nickel, cobalt, manganese, copper, a new frontier for the energy transition. But this solution has its own dark side. The deep sea is one of the least understood ecosystems on Earth. Mining it could disturb habitats that science has barely studied. It could create sediment plumes, destroy slow-forming ecosystems, and trigger a new legal fight over who owns the ocean floor. So the world faces a brutal choice: mine on land and face water conflict, community resistance, deforestation, and displacement. Mine the ocean floor and risk damaging ecosystems we barely understand. Recycle aggressively, but still fall short in the years when demand is rising fastest. Slow down the energy transition, and climate targets slip further away. There is no clean escape. That is the part the marketing campaigns leave out. The green future is not a world without extraction. It is a world where extraction becomes more important, more politicized, and more contested. And copper sits at the center of it. This is why the copper cartel is not just about price. It is about power. A country with copper can demand better terms. A country with smelting capacity can shape supply chains. A country with rail corridors can decide whose minerals reach the sea. A country with manufacturing dominance can turn raw copper into batteries, cars, turbines, cables, and leverage. And countries without any of those things are exposed. They can announce green targets, they can subsidize factories, they can pass climate laws. But if they do not control the minerals, the processing, or the supply routes, their clean energy future depends on someone else's ground. That is the great irony. The energy transition was supposed to reduce dependence, but in many ways, it is creating new dependencies. Not on oil tankers, on copper concentrate, not on gas pipelines, on smelters, not on OPEC, on the fragile politics of mining regions. The world is not moving from dirty energy to clean energy. It is moving from one resource order to another, and every resource order has winners, losers, and conflict. The winners will be the countries and companies that understand the physical reality early. They will secure supply, build refining capacity, invest in recycling, negotiate with producer nations before desperation sets in, and design products that use less copper where possible. The losers will be the ones that treat the energy transition like a software update, as if the grid can be upgraded by press release, as if mines appear because politicians set targets, as if local communities will simply accept sacrifice because the word green is attached to the project. They will not. Because for the people living near the mines, this is not an abstract climate model. It is their water, their land, their roads, their health, their future. And for governments, this is not just environmental policy, it is industrial survival. The copper war will not always look like war. Sometimes it will look like a protest blocking a mine road in Peru. Sometimes it will look like a new royalty law in Chile. Sometimes it will look like a rail deal in Angola. Sometimes it will look like a Chinese smelter buying concentrate before anyone else can get it. Sometimes it will look like a Western government suddenly discovering that free markets do not guarantee critical minerals when every major power is trying to secure the same supply. This is the dark secret of decarbonization. The cleaner the final product becomes, the more pressure moves upstream, away from the city, away from the consumer, away from the showroom, into the mine, into the desert, into the rainforest, into the port, into the ocean floor. The future may still be electric, but it will not be weightless. It will be dug, crushed, refined, shipped, financed, contested, and defended. And the central question is not whether we need copper. We do. The question is whether the world can build a copper economy that does not repeat the worst habits of the fossil fuel age. Because if we fail, the green revolution will not end the age of resource wars. It will simply paint them green. And that is why the battle for copper is not a temporary hurdle on the road to a sustainable future. It may be the defining conflict of the mid-21st century.